Charlie, welcome. How are you doing today?
Hey, yeah, very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you very much for being on. So it's your first time on, and as I like to do with all my guests, I like to ask them how they became an SEO professional. So with that said, how did you get into SEO and become an SEO professional?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's not really a kind of crazy story with how I got into SEO, but I think like everyone I know, I kind of fell into it in a way. So I studied marketing at university, but a lot more like traditional advertising. So I knew that I
Hmm.
kind of always had an interest in marketing and yeah, obviously how kind of brands kind of navigate kind of the market today. But it was really like towards like yeah, like TV advertising, media. That's kind of where I thought I would kind of end up. And then it was only kind of like halfway through my degree. This is kind of going back like 10 years when I started out, but halfway through, I really obviously I grew up kind of with the internet anyway, and kind of how I was seeing how brands were starting to use it a lot more, especially kind of like social media and how they were creating more content, etc. So it was actually like that's where I started to think. Actually, I think I really kind of wanted to move towards kind of like working online, but I didn't
Hmm.
really know how that would look. I didn't really foresee how that would work out. See, when I graduated, applied for all sorts of jobs in London. So I live in the southeast, so not far from London. So I was going for all sorts of internships and roles, and it was actually a job that come up like very close to where I live, which is kind of quite a small town. So it's quite surprising that it's kind of like there was an SEO agency out here. But yeah, this is going back kind of so like 10 years, and I still remember like the job I'd it was kind of quite content based. So I was looking for like a blog writer. Um, so I kind of had an idea like it was a bit of a stretch from what I studied, but I thought I'd give it a go, and yeah, like kind of fell into it that way. And um, it started off with like blog content, but because it was such a long time ago, predominantly it was kind of like link building as well. And I dread to think about some of the links that we actually created at that time, but. Yeah, that was kind of how I kind of like fell into it. Really, it was very very random. Started off at like a small agency, and then from there, when I got into the role, I kind of started to kind of navigate it a bit more and find out what areas I liked, and I obviously researched a lot more to do with SEO and kind of realized kind of there was quite an established career path available to take. So
Mm.
yeah, that's how it
It's
kind of come about. So
it's always interesting to me how SEOs got into the industry or how the industry found SEOs. Because it requires a certain most SEOs that I know got into it almost by accident, but I think it was more a calling than it being an accident, because somehow this industry attracts people with our mindset, our curious mindset. And it's so wide and vast that people can get in from a content point of view, on page, off page. They can be technical, they can be analytical. It requires someone who has a very curious mind to want to solve problems. At the end of the day, we're all problem solvers in this industry. So I always find it fascinating how one gets into or got into SEO. Would you say you're more of a content, technical, analytical, or more of an all-rounder?
so I think at different stages I've been kind of like more
Right.
different hats, I guess.
Yeah.
And some of those have been like when I've worked on my own site. Some of those have been kind of like black hats as well. But they've kind of I've definitely moved towards kind of more content strategy, which is strange really because that's how I like entered the industry.
Mm.
And then kind of took on different roles, like I say, kind of like link building. I've worked in like outreach specific roles, kind of done some technical as well. But I really I love like the technical, I love the content strategy side and kind of how you can kind of like shape customer journeys through the content that you're able to present them with.
Mm.
Um, and like yeah, you're absolutely right. Kind of at a different touch points for entering SEO is kind of I think that's because it is so varied, isn't it? You can
Yeah.
kind of you could have like six SEOs all having a chat, and they could all come at it from completely different angles
Yeah.
and starting points. But obviously, we're all drawn to like the same thing, and
Mm.
so yeah, that's kind of what I think I really love, and whether that's kind of like the different roles of seeing work, like agency sites I've worked with, kind of like SEOs that have been like, yeah, it's just super kind of maybe like all rounders and really good at the client side. But then
Mm.
like there's been others that are really, really like they do things technically that I couldn't even imagine. And I kind of think, wow, that's like, yeah, that's so impressive. So yeah, that's kind of why I love it, because I think it requires quite different skill sets.
Yeah, you mentioned link building and also black hat SEO. Now, these days, I'm
Yeah.
sure everyone will claim to be white hat, but in the 10 or so years ago, there was how can I put this politically? The boundaries were quite, it was quite broad in the approach that we could use. I would say pre-Penguin, pretty much anything went, especially when it came to link building.
Yeah.
And these days, I find that yes, it's fine to say white hat, black hat. The reality, though, is it's very much dependent on the industry you're in, right? If you're in the gaming slash gambling industry, whether you like it or not, is very competitive. So you have to be very aggressive with your link building approach, and that might lead to a grey approach, let's say. Whereas industry that's more content led, they tend to use or require less links, so they can classify themselves as white hat. What's your take on the whole white, black, and maybe even grey hat approach to SEO?
Yeah, so I think what you just said about the industry, it is so industry specific. I guess like a lot of things with SEO in a way. But yeah, like, yeah, definitely. I think again, if we had kind of like, we had different websites or different projects, and I was working on an e-commerce website and you was working on a gambling website, the deliverables and the activities we were carrying out in order to get results would be very different.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we would obviously have we would have very different ways of not justifying them, but ways of kind of, I guess, like even if we're like selling them to a client of how this is what we need to do to kind of, yeah, to see the returns that ideally we want to see. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's very interesting. And I think yeah, I haven't, like I said, this was kind of going back some years, and I think again, like it's so interesting as well how SEO has changed in that time, because obviously we mentioned kind of pre-Penguin, or we say that, but it's not really all that long ago, but it's changed
Yeah.
obviously quite considerably.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite, and like I say, even like 10 years, it's kind of like I genuinely like, yeah, some of the links we were creating nowadays, like they would have been so low quality,
Yeah.
but it's just so like, I don't know how many, obviously all industries have changed a lot in that time, but industry and SEO has really kind of come on a lot. So yeah, so that's kind of what I find interesting there. And a
Mm.
lot of these were kind of like test projects for myself. So I think when I entered SEO, I just wanted to learn as much as possible. And
Mm.
I probably didn't even know there were different hats. I just kind of wanted to see what worked and what didn't, and then
Mm.
kind of probably went down some potentially wrong rabbit holes, or like yeah, like interesting rabbit holes, kind of different forums, and kind of brought packages just to see kind of whether what does this move the needle,
Mm.
and if so, kind of, yeah, what impact does it have? Because I think that's kind of, and that's a lot of the advice I give to like new SEOs as well. It's just like, just try and test for yourself,
Yeah.
not necessarily to go like that extreme, but just
It's what
if you
makes a
want to
good
kind of
SEO,
rank,
right?
see what type of content. That's it. Yeah, that's it. And obviously, I think with time, unfortunately, as we move along, we maybe have less time to do that, unfortunately, or from like personal experience. But
Mm.
it's something I always try and like, yeah, still try and develop websites and test for myself.
Mm. Now you're currently a consultant or contractor.
Yeah.
So and you previously
Yeah, yeah, consultant.
consultant, right? You've also have in-house and agency experience. I'm curious, which do you prefer? Let's say out of agency and in-house.
Yeah. So you know what? I listen. I can't remember. I can't remember who it was, but I listened to another one of your podcasts who was actually a consultant as well. And he mentioned he said about like the experience he got at agency side was so valuable. He was like so like really pleased that he'd done it. And I completely agree with that. Like you just get exposed to so many different accounts, so many different types of clients, and kind of different like funnels of the SEO stage, kind of from selling SEO and what's involved through to kind of like handling upset clients and kind of why they're not seeing SEO in the same way, which I think is so valuable because not that you don't get that in-house, you obviously have different shareholders, but I think the demands are very different. I think there's a lot of times that like when I worked for an agency, it was kind of like, yeah, just because of those demands, they were like, it was times that I was kind of like, yeah, I don't know, there's got to be an easier way to do this, or like to like more enjoyable. And that's just kind of personally how I found it with certain like aspects of it. And in-house, like I say, it's very different, and it's so dependent on team setup and like the experience of those around you. How, again, you still have to kind of like sell SEO in a way to like, yeah, those kind of up the ladder, I guess, and up the chain, but in completely different ways. So yeah, I've had kind of like mixed experiences, I would say, but I've enjoyed it completely. Completely. Like I said, I wouldn't kind of swap anything, but yeah, there are definitely demands of agency side that I kind of think about and wouldn't necessarily rush back to, if that makes sense.
I think the one issue I have with agency side SEO is that it all leads to selling SEO rather than necessarily doing SEO. And I think there is a clear distinction between the two of them. When you're in-house, you're definitely like your work is based on results of the SEO performance, the SEO channel performance. With agency side, it's more a case of can you sell SEO? In fact, all your training is, and especially the higher up you go, the more your training is geared towards selling the service or the product in some cases, and it sometimes is a disservice, I think, to the SEO unless the agency is very much focused on the client's ability to implement recommendations, because otherwise the SEO will view it as, okay, my job ends at delivering the recommendations and that's it. From an in-house point of view, that's just the beginning, right? That's just the beginning side of things. What's
Yeah.
life like as an in-house SEO?
When I was in house, well, one of the roles I had in house was it was quite a large team, but we was all specifically kind of outreach focused. So it's quite interesting in a way because it was a role that a lot of in-house probably would outsource, if that makes sense, or they probably
Right.
would hand off to an agency. Sorry. So it was quite interesting in a way that we obviously had our own targets and that we needed to meet, and it was quite a big team of us doing those and trying to hit that. And obviously, like you said, around kind of like the deliverables, that was our bread and butter. That's what we done every single day.
Yeah.
Kind of when we arrived to when we left, it was kind of we obviously that I was kind of a SEO analyst at SEO exec level then.
Right.
So I kind of had the task assigned to me, and kind of this is kind of what we've got to do kind of week by week, month by month. And it kind of, there wasn't too much noise other than that. We obviously had to check in and kind of see where at certain stages. But yeah, it was very much working on deliverables. Sorry, I've got a one of my dogs. So hopefully you can't hear. Let me just see if I can pause a second.
Sure,
And
go for it.
I'll try and let her up.
Go for it.
There you go. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No
Yeah, I
worries.
usually use. I've got like Crisp. I don't know if you use that for like headphones. Um,
Crisp.
it
I'm
kind of like cuts out background noise.
right.
Uh, just because sometimes they do bark, but hopefully it kind of I'll be able to. She'll be okay
Okay, no worries. No worries at all. No
now.
worries at all. So let's say agency side. Let's go back to agency side because I find the two different mindsets quite interesting. There are two different SEO mindsets: agency and in-house client side. And I find that a lot of agency SEOs, if they don't have in-house experience, the work that they produce is very much sales led. So, for example, let's say let's say an account director sells in SEO, and that's all great. But the person who's actually doing the work, sometimes, a lot of the times, there is a misunderstanding between the selling of SEO and the actual deliverable of SEO. There is always, in my opinion, a gap in between, and I find that it's a very challenging process to deliver great work for clients when that gap exists. And unfortunately, there is agencies, depending on the agency, they sometimes the gap might be short, might be long. What can agencies do to narrow that gap, or ideally get rid of the gap between the sales process and the actual deliverable of the work?
Yeah, so that is such a great question. This is actually something I've kind of spoke about quite a lot, and it's probably the primary reason that I wanted to kind of go like become a consultant was to try and marry those two phases together, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Just because
completely.
I've seen it so many times where like within an agency you'll have people that are great at sales. They can go and sell the benefits of SEO all day long. But then what often happens is that as soon as that account's won and becomes a client, then it's handed off to kind of like maybe like potentially like junior SEOs who are
Junior,
working
yeah.
across like multiple accounts, and then working across kind of sometimes the number of accounts that I've heard kind of like execs working across is kind of like mind-boggling to me. But and then it just becomes like it just becomes a matter of resource and just kind of like continually struggling to kind of deliver what was obviously against expectations and what was thought to be kind of at the outset of the campaign. And obviously that leads to the first kind of 2-3 months that might be okay, but then it gets to a point where unhappiness kind of rears its head. So yeah, I think that is genuinely like so the $1 million question. I feel like for so many agencies to kind of to meet that. I think a lot of it does come from kind of team structure, and kind of really making sure that obviously sales is a part of every single business, kind of no matter the industry. So there's obviously there's always going to be kind of new client pipelines and hopefully new business coming in. But ensuring that the team structure is in place to actually handle that business and provide kind of the services that were kind of discussed and sold is vital, which obviously a lot of agencies are capable of doing. But I've seen kind of cases where that's not always necessarily the case. So yeah, making sure that the team structure, and I don't think there's SEO like everything in SEO. I don't think there's like kind of like one size fits all. I think
Right, yeah.
it might be kind of the use of account managers, and then obviously delegating to execs and analysts, or you might have kind of like pods and teams that work across the same type of niche clients, etc. So, but I think having an idea of what that looks like is so important in order to kind of like manage that resource and ensure that there isn't kind of yeah, this kind of pipeline of new clients coming in without like the resources they're actually capable of handling it and delivering,
Yeah.
working on deliverables that are going to get results. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's kind of like a bit of a bland answer, but yeah, that's kind of how I see. To be honest, that is something I'm continue kind of like working and seeing, kind of, especially working because like being a consultant quite early stages, working at kind of how can I make sure I've got the processes in place for myself to avoid that, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I just see it so much with SEOs.
Yeah, and I think it's very much an agency specific issue, because I speak with consultants quite often, and they never have this issue as a consultant. It's only either when they become an agency or a bigger agency, and I find that the bigger the agency, the conglomerate, it's all about sales with those big conglomerates, and it's unfortunate, I think, for the clients. But I think clients are very much, the more SEO is spread across digital, the more clients will be aware of the differences.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's obviously it's such an interesting topic, because I feel like SEO can get a bad name anyway, like purely for the past and what we was kind of speaking about
Yeah.
10 minutes ago, and maybe some of that sketchy past and what goes on. And I think like, obviously the issue now isn't necessarily the with deliverables being low quality, but exactly what you just mentioned, kind of some of the agencies are giant sales machines, and actually kind of the deliverables are probably absolutely fine. It's just kind of, that's all they are. They're fine, and they're not kind of as good as they could be if kind of there was more kind of resource and care given to them. So I think it's something that all agencies are grappling with to some extent. And obviously, like you say, the bigger the size, it's kind of the more the issue comes up, I think.
Yeah, I think in the next 5 or so years, we're going to have even more SEOs becoming consultants, because they're going to come to the conclusion, I think, that why not just get clients myself? I already know SEO, I do SEO.
Yeah.
Why do I need a salesperson to sell clients for me? And probably I could sell it better than the salesperson, because I actually know what I'm talking about. But hey.
Definitely, yeah, absolutely, and I think it's and also that kind of, if you are split across kind of like 10, 15 accounts, you're probably, some of the work you're putting out. Well, I've kind of had experiences of, I was just kind of like, I would love to be able to spend more time on this, but I just can't.
Yeah.
So there's kind of definitely kind of like, there's definitely that side as well. And if I was to, I had the thought previously that if I was a consultant, I was able to limit the clients I wanted to work with to a certain number, then I would be able to delegate that time and kind of really keep the standard high. So I think you're right. I think it's going to be interesting to see how to see how the SEO industry develops and how people kind of use and find talent as well, because obviously I know kind of just from speaking to other agency owners, or it's quite tough to hire at times, especially now. So it'd be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, definitely. Now, going to client side rather, brands have this opinion, or I will say mindset. Some brands, I should correct myself, some brands have this mindset that once you invest in SEO, once you commit to investing in SEO, that is all that business leadership has to do. We know that SEO takes a lot more than just investing in it. I think the management of SEO is a big aspect that a lot of brands unfortunately do not grasp just yet. What can SEOs do to help a brand understand that, okay, you've invested in SEO, but it's going to take a lot more to actually see results from SEO?
Yeah, so I think that can almost start earlier as well. like I think it can always start if you, obviously depending if you do have that, if you are part of that sales process, or even kind of like the onboarding process to I think we often think of kind of like client expectations around results, but actually that it can work both ways and be kind of client expectations as in like what is needed from them, like internally.
Right. Yeah.
And it's obviously it's difficult because sometimes you might not want to have that conversation, because if there was obviously the risk that they turn around and say, actually, we don't have a dev team here. Yeah, this is going to take us 7 months to implement,
Yeah.
like a task that should take several weeks. So it's obviously like, yeah, and then it obviously leads to other kind of priorities that actually they probably need to get in place first. So I think that's kind of one way around it, is obviously having that client expectation. But I think obviously if we're at the kind of deliverable phase and actually working on the campaign, I think it's just working with them to kind of prioritize as much as possible and to highlight the impact as much as possible. And that comes back to trying to work with them to identify what are their main goals for SEO, which obviously for everyone is completely different, but they eventually work their way back up to a stage that actually they might say one thing, they might want to, they feel like they might want to rank a certain page, but actually they really want to drive more conversions, which is probably a kind of completely different kind of objective. So I think working with them to identify that, and then obviously prioritizing the tasks that are going to have the biggest impact on that.
Yeah.
And then once you have that, it starts with probably small tasks and small deliverables, and trying to almost chisel away at kind of like the bigger efforts, which can be, obviously, I'm sure all SEOs have had to deal with at some time or another. We have like a big picture of how we want things to look, and it can take time to get there. But yeah, I think just breaking it down and prioritizing it as much as possible, but ensuring that the client understands kind of why we're doing certain things and how it all kind of works back up to the main goal.
To the main goal, yeah.
It's quite important. Yeah, and obviously we can kind of shape the narrative around that. So when we do have early data, we can obviously show them that this is why we're doing it, and hopefully that gets more buy-in from their side to then attribute the resource to kind of, whether it's kind of implementation or building out their team to help, etc. So yeah, it definitely is. That's a headache I don't think is going to go away too soon either, to be honest.
Yeah.
Now, I guess it's something as SEO becomes more, I guess, not mainstream, but gets like a bigger chunk of the budget will eventually kind of ease. But yeah, it's still going to be an issue, I guess.
Now, I'm sure you get this question from clients all the time. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. Let's say a head of digital has in mind that they invest in SEO, and then 6 months' time, because they've been through several SEO overview training, they've been to Brighton SEO, and they've heard SEO takes roughly 6 months to show results. But from your analysis, you know that this is a client that A, requires SEO for a lot longer, and B, requires SEO forever, for as long as they have a website. So how do you go about helping them change their mindset from seeing SEO almost the way they see traditional marketing, like, or PPC, for example, to looking at SEO as an always-on activity?
Yeah, as soon as you started out, I knew that. Yeah, I thought this question was coming. But I think how I start to approach it is I try to kind of leverage a lot of competitor data. I think especially when when you mentioned around kind of like the marketing managers or like director of marketing that have like some idea of how SEO works, but no real kind of like in-depth knowledge. And like you say, they might feel like it's something they can do as a sprint and then turn off. Is actually to kind of like leverage like competitor data, especially when it comes to content, is to try and show kind of how competitors have developed their content strategy for a length of time. And then obviously like the results they're getting from that, obviously it's all kind of like third party tools, but to try and show some kind of estimates of traffic and the likely uplift they're going to have from that, from conversions, to try and kind of create the narrative around like, and obviously like as everyone knows, in business no one wants to see their kind of competitors doing something that they know they should be but haven't been doing, or so that's kind of, I think that's where that can come in really well. And I guess that's from my perspective, from like content and content strategy is slightly easier in a way, because obviously if I was to crawl a blog and grab all of the published dates, I can quite easily show kind of how many pieces of content have been published over the last 6 months, etc. And then obviously marry that with data from like third party tools that to show kind of the uplift there. It's a little bit harder, I guess, with like on page or technical, because you'd have to get a little bit more into nitty gritty. There might be things you're not sure that they've changed on a website. But content, and I guess link building to an extent as well, you can obviously show like you'll be able to identify where like a competitor has undergone kind of quite significant kind of link building campaigns or digital PR campaigns to see an influx of new links. So yeah, I think that's where, obviously not on its own, that we'd have to kind of tie that in then with like a timeline or like a deliverable action plan of kind of here's how we can maybe bridge that gap and here's how we can make SEO work over the long term. So like starting to show them how SEO would look, not just in 3 months time, but in like 12 months time, which is very, very difficult. That's obviously comes with a caveat, because you need to kind of like remain agile and make sure you always kind of expect the unexpected in a way. But yeah, just starting to show them how it can be longer term, and some of the potential results that can come from that long-term commitment as well.
I think nothing gets a brand's attention than showing them what their competitor brands are doing. Because the reality, I think, really sinks in like, oh, okay, they have an SEO person who's doing all of these work in-house properly. That means we need to be doing something like this, otherwise we're going to fall behind. I think that right there is just like a headline notice to brands. I've never shown a brand competitor activity with them not at least buying it and seeing that, okay, this is something that we need to do ASAP.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's that's definitely what can kind of get them to kind of sit up. And yeah, the amount of conversations I'll have that like they're aware their competitors doing something. They're like, we know they've been working on this. Like, we used to rank number one for this topic, or like here, like across these keywords. And we don't anymore. Like, we haven't given much love to it, but actually this competitor we see keep popping up. So yeah, we need to kind of fight back against that. And obviously the I guess the issue is at that stage it's like we're potentially kind of like 3, 6, 9 months behind, so it's not as easy as just getting going straight away. But it's which I guess is part of the conversation you have to like build in, and it goes back to those like managing expectations. But yeah, no, it's kind of, again, like I think that's a really good one, like a really good good point to kind of try and get across quite early.
Definitely. Now let's switch to content. Content means different things to different people. Blog, or let's say a content-led site, will see content as pieces of words on a page, and it has to be specifically words. An e-commerce site will say, we're an e-commerce site, we don't need 400 plus articles all over the site. And because of this, trying to explain that, okay, for SEO to be very effective, the content has to include words. There's no getting around to it. You might have a product landing page, but you have to have words on the page. And because of this, there is almost a misunderstanding of what content is. Some people think of it as words. Content is synonymous with words. Others see it as what the page is. What's your view on content, and how would you define content?
Yeah, so I would probably have, I don't I can't have two answers here, can I guess?
Go for it. It's all
Because
your
I
view,
guess there's a
so
yeah, no, I think I think I think it's definitely changing, like more and more and more. And I think I've probably gone from, and with it, I think my answer has definitely changed. Like I say, like from where I started out, I think I would definitely have been, and not even that long ago, I think I would definitely have been kind of like content is words, and we need X many, we need to cover kind of, yeah, definitely cover this and this topic, etc. But I think that, yeah, like you say, like videos and imagery, kind of whether like in different ways, and kind of interactive features are just play such a huge part in content now. And if we
hmm
kind of don't recognize that, I feel like it's um I feel like you kind of content will be left behind in a way. I think that it's just kind of, obviously there's so much talk about kind of attention spans and how they're obviously shortening for so many different reasons. And I think kind of like some of the elements we kind of like referenced, or obviously trying to kind of address that a little bit. So for me, kind of content would ideally be at least words, but with some elements, including kind of if the search intent does suit kind of like video content as well, then that's definitely kind of something we'd definitely love to kind of incorporate. So yeah, and it obviously changes depending on whether it is just blog content or like a solution or a service page where text is a little bit more like thin on the ground, so we don't have as much opportunity there. And actually, we probably do need to leverage some of those other elements. So yeah, I think it's probably a combination of both. But yeah, if you'd have asked me even like 3 years ago, I think it would have just been text.
Yeah, I think the sites like or apps like TikTok and even to an extent YouTube is changing the way
Mm.
consumers or searchers view content. Because nowadays, I think I have a theory that the default content type is almost video now, because of TikTok and YouTube, as I mentioned. I think people are more interested in seeing a video of what they're looking for rather than just reading something. So I think the content type is changing. I think the default is now video. I think in the beginning,
Mm.
early days of search, it was definitely text, absolutely. But now with
Mm.
multimedia content, I think video, the whole element of audio, visual, and all of that being readable by machines now makes it probably what Google be pushing more in the near future. But that's just pure speculation on my part.
Yeah, I think that's definitely. I think obviously, as we say, like SEO is always changing, isn't it? I think that just it would make sense for that to be kind of like the next evolution in a way, and kind
Mm.
of how we're gonna use that. So I think yeah, no, I agree completely. And I think there's certain like verticals that lends itself to already. Like I work with like a client that create a lot of like recipes.
Mm.
And then previously, obviously, that would be. I don't know if you kind of obviously the recipe SERP is there's a lot of imagery on there already, and a lot of like videos are becoming more and more prevalent now as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think yeah, like a vertical like that, I think will just become like even more reliant on videos because it's just what people want to follow, isn't it? It's kind
Yeah,
of like you
exactly.
want to
Yeah.
search, but it's and Google, obviously all Google wants to do is provide the most value as quickly as possible. So I
Mm-hmm.
think yeah, I think that's definitely super interesting. I was actually with with like my mother-in-law like the other week. It's a bit of a random story, but she was actually getting a recipe up and she was moaning about all of the content above the video, like at the top of the page. So she was like, right, looking for it. She's like, why have I always got to scroll through all of this content? And obviously I didn't dive in and actually tell her kind of, give her the SEO answer. But then it actually got me thinking exactly what you just said, like that doesn't really make any sense. And I think kind of, like verticals like that will just start prioritizing other kind of, particularly video, but also other elements as well. So,
Yeah.
no, I think that's definitely something that's going to be interesting to like track and navigate for sure.
Yeah, because Google's here to serve their users, and user intent and expectation changes. Google has to meet that demand. It's funny. I think a lot of non SEOs or even non marketers, they almost view Google search in a similar way, I think, nowadays to the way they view, let's say, Facebook and Instagram. They almost think of it as a social site, and they expect when they search for something, they expect what they search for on Google is Google providing it. They don't necessarily attribute that to websites working to be on Google. They see it almost
Yeah.
as Google providing them answers the way Facebook or Instagram would. It's
Yeah.
interesting. I think the way they view Google is definitely very different to marketers.
Definitely, and I think that's kind of understandable as well, especially some like search engine results pages. Like, I don't know if you're looking at like World Cup scores. Like, there's so many different elements on that now. Like,
Yeah.
it's basically given to, or like fixture. Like, if you're looking for like sporting fixtures or anything like that, it's not a traditional search, like results page whatsoever. It is kind of this. It is almost like a, you can like interact with it. You can see, there's all sorts of like clickable elements without even going to a website, which obviously has been around for a while. As SEOs know, kind of, like we've got to work harder for that click through rate.
Mm.
But there are some SERPs that are like completely like just dominated by results that aren't traditional whatsoever.
Is Google still a search engine then? Or is it more of a social media site these days?
Yeah, that's. I wonder what they would see themselves at. I think fundamentally it is kind of. It obviously still is the search is the basis, but I mean I've got like the Google Hub in my home and like the like Alexa alternative, which is like obviously you can use it for search, but then it does a lot of other things as well. Like it's almost like like a lifestyle extension almost, which I guess
Mm.
social media is in a way, but I think. It's that's kind of something we've always got to like grapple with in a way, isn't it, as SEOs and
Yeah, definitely. Now, Twitter has been on my mind. In fact, Elon Musk, since he bought Twitter, has been has been in the news even more so than before. It seems the whole blue check mark and paying for it as a subscription. I've been going back and forth about it because on one hand I think it's finally a business model that Twitter can use and succeed with, so great for them. On the other hand, I have my SEO hat on, and I'm thinking, how is this going to impact search? Because if you're now paying for the blue check mark, and Google is having Twitter results within search, will they only show blue check mark Twitter results, almost as a credibility aspect? And if that is the case, then surely those who don't have a blue check mark will need to get a blue check mark to be seen as also credible, right? I mean, this might affect their whole rating guidelines. What's your take on how Google will potentially respond to the Twitter's blue check mark?
is a good question. It's I do obviously they need to find a business model, and Elon Musk is obviously going to try as hard as possible to find that revenue, well, as many revenue streams as possible. I think the way I don't know, I just see it as kind of almost like eroding that credibility in a way, in a strange way, because
Yeah.
obviously there's just like, because of the ease of access, obviously it's still like a payment, but it's still like, yeah, it's just almost like people say a shortcut to credibility, which I think over time will just kind of erode that credibility. So I think it probably will take time for like another authority to kind of, or other ways of authority to be established on the platform. I think, and obviously there's different ways that can happen. Obviously, it should in theory be kind of like interactions or like, yeah, followers, but that's obviously something that can be gained in a way as well. Um, and obviously with the amount of like, I think one of the blocks to like purchase in the first place was the number of fake users, and they just still don't know, do they, how many
No.
is actually on the platform. So I think there will be kind of like other forms of authority that come about through this move. But yeah, I don't know. I find it a little bit of a strange one, because obviously that was such an easy identifier of authority. So I actually, to be honest, it's a really good question. I'm still not sure of how Google will handle it. How do you feel their approach to that?
I think it might impact the what we SEOs define as branded keywords, because now I think, let's say, people, right, persons, credible persons, identity will now be considered a branded person. So if someone searches for Charlie, your name, sorry, someone searches for you, you're almost like a branded keyword and treated as a branded keyword rather than like what we would consider generic keywords. And I think that might be the key to
Yeah,
things, as in people's identity will become more of a prominent thing. When someone searches for Piers Morgan, that is almost, that is not almost, that is a branded keyword search. So that might be the case in that a lot of people's identity will need to be tied or linked to their social platforms, and that will be what Google uses to define how they go about considering credibility. Which the show Black Mirror comes to mind, because I'm thinking, what will people then do to acquire that credibility? You know, their names will have to mean something, and people will be building to have their names mean something. They already do so now, right? We have the whole, with social media, clout is a big thing. It's less so for SEO, but that might spill into SEO. Now that branded terms will be more of a big deal, because I also think the way search is now, it's develops people's way of searching for things. You know, people now, I think branded will become more of a big deal to generic keywords. Let's say 10, 15 years ago, if you had searched for tablet, let's say, you would get pills on Google. Nowadays, you search for tablet, you get the actual device. You know, tablet is a thing, and people know to search for that thing. Whereas before, they didn't know how to go about finding things. So people's ability to search, no, that's not the right phrase. People's awareness of search, let's say, has improved, and I think because of that, they'll be quick to go for what we consider branded terms now, because they'll be quick to
yeah.
know branded terms. So I think the next 2 to 3 years will be very pivotal for search.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think there's so much to unpack there, isn't it? Because obviously, like there's a lot of talk, obviously, on kind of like the impact of what we've already mentioned, video, and like kind of like the rivalry of like prominence of like TikTok, which I do personally, I think is a little bit overstated, but I think the big impact it will have is the influence, like you say, on how people search. So I don't necessarily see it as like a long-term rival to like being a different search engine, but it will definitely influence kind of how people search. And yeah, it's just something we almost do kind of, yeah, like you just do unconsciously, isn't it? And how we kind of like shorten certain searches, or how we kind of, yeah, we do that. So yeah, that's a really good point around kind of like branded terms. And I think it speaks to the way that obviously, especially like in the business world, like kind of people's personal brand is such a big thing, isn't it? It's something
Yeah.
that people want to protect and obviously and build and nurture. So I think it ties into that completely, and so yeah, it definitely makes sense. Obviously, there are some Black Mirror elements to it, but that's all kind of, yeah, I guess something that Google's obviously, I'm sure, already has like plenty they're working on. It's obviously quite different, but authorship was something they tried to push quite heavily, wasn't it? At one point, they really wanted to kind of
Yeah.
establish that, and it often takes some time for like these things to kind of like emerge again. So whether it's kind of something that kind of would obviously build on top of that, but maybe that's kind of a case of that coming like slightly too early, and that's actually going to be something that would re-emerge. But yeah, it's obviously that's kind of one of the joys of what we do, isn't it? To
Yeah.
see those evolutions and changes.
What is this like something from Google or search which we no longer have, SEOs no longer have, and it could be anything. So a tool, a service. For me, you probably would say this as well, but for me, it's keywords data on analytics, Google Analytics. Being able to see that is just or no longer being able to see that. It's a if I could have one wish for Christmas or the New Year, it would be that
Yeah.
Google somehow decide that it's actually a good idea to bring it back and then add it. It will never happen, but if I were wishing, if I could, if Google's listening, if you can have this on GA, please do.
Yeah, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? I
Yeah.
think, to be fair, I feel like as an industry, like it's obviously like tools have become so advanced now, haven't they? Like Ahrefs and SEMrush as well, that obviously they've helped to kind of bridge that gap. But considering there was so much data lost, like I feel like we do a pretty good job of actually kind of like making up for that in a way, and
Yeah.
kind of like working around it. But yeah, that would definitely, I think, yeah, that would definitely be right up there. There's just like a lot of, I'm trying to think of like the name of some like old tools as well that I used to use that have like now become like redundant. I can't think of the top of my head, but yeah, like from really early days of like keyword research of like, they probably obviously were leveraging a lot of the data from like Search Console as well, and a lot of like keyword planner data as well.
Oh,
But yeah,
remember, yeah,
like we're
keyword
like probably
planner.
going back from,
Keyword planner, it was like
yeah,
keyword tool previously, right? And it's not, it was never the same. I remember it was around about, I think it was around about panda penguin time that they changed it. And I remember at that time I used to, because they had a rollover period where we still had keywords tool, right? And I used to check the data set on both of them, and I remember being very disappointed because I could see that, oh yeah, they're aggregating it very differently now. Yeah, that's another one I
yeah.
wish we still had.
But yeah, there's, but like I said, I do feel like, yeah, I do wonder what it would be like now, how like we would present the data differently if we had access to all of it. But I think, yeah, I do think the tools we do have now, they're not perfect, and they obviously, again, like they have different data points, and like they show different search volumes and demand, etc. But I feel like we can kind of use them to paint a good enough picture to obviously like establish strategies to be successful. So yeah, I feel like that is a big loss, but yeah, and I guess if we had that data, would tools such as Ahrefs be as, I guess they would, because Ahrefs is able to shine a light on competitors in a way that obviously like we never had before. But yeah, like losing that data almost paved the way even more
Yeah,
for these tools
for
that
these
we've seen
tools.
kind of
Yeah.
grow into like giants. Yeah, so it's quite, I guess, yeah, good for those tools and more, yeah, in particular.
Absolutely. Now, in my mind, every human on earth should know, love, and maybe even do SEO. There are clients, brand side, that they are aware of SEO. They find it daunting and are not necessarily sure on why, or if they do need to know about SEO, what level of SEO they need to be aware of. So they might think of SEO as something for SEOs to know, and we SEOs know that, okay, knowing SEO is for, or doing SEO is for SEOs, but non-SEOs need to have a certain level of understanding for SEO to really be successful. What level of understanding do you think non-SEOs should have about SEO?
Yeah, that's another great question. I feel like, yeah, it's hard to put like kind of, yeah, kind of like a specific like answer to it. But
Yeah.
I think that is, I think, just from experience, like I love working with like clients that, and just others that are like, or chatting to people that have some like a good idea of what SEO is, even if it means that they kind of, yeah, which I guess it's hard because obviously what I would say like beginner might be different for how you would kind of like obviously
Yeah.
like classify beginner in a way. Um, so yeah, it's quite hard to kind of like define in that way. But I think just some like, I guess exposure, I guess like going back to that, like, and not everyone's going to have their own website, which is the issue, but like some exposures from like tracking, whether it's like content or on-site changes and like measuring that performance. So they might not necessarily even kind of like keep up with like the latest blogs, or they might not have taken like a, like no, like a SEO course online that they felt like was going to benefit them. But having some exposure to kind of like having like a strategy to, we feel like this is going to have an impact on organic search, and then trying to monitor that, whether it's kind of like tracking keyword performance, looking at analytics, which again, I think is obviously the biggest benefit of having like your own website, like a test website,
Yeah.
or yeah, having access to like a school, because obviously you don't want to do it on, if you're like new to an in-house role, you don't, that's a lot of responsibility, you don't want to be making big changes. But I think, yeah, like having that intermediate level of like exposure to like trying to try, whether it's like fixing like, I'm going to say like technical changes, but for like technical changes, you'd still need that like initial beginner like
Yeah,
step to kind of get to that.
it's very much dependent on, I guess, the individual, right? Because if it's let's say a digital marketer who's more of an all-rounder in digital marketing, I think just an awareness of the different metrics can suffice. A head of marketing will probably want to focus more on understanding the metrics and how that leads into revenue. So Chris, I spoke with Chris Green on like not so long ago, and he has the SEO metrics chain, which I think was fantastic because it shows how metrics from crawlability all the way to revenue are linked, and it shows it in a very succinct way that I think a lot of, and I think it's in a way that a lot of different people, different levels will, non-SEOs will see, understand, and be like, okay, I know what needs to be done, what the issues are, and that might be something that I think will be, I think that'll be very useful for non-SEOs across the board, whether they're junior non-SEOs all the way to business leadership level.
Yeah, that's a great. I saw that on LinkedIn actually. I think yeah, that is kind of really valuable because, like you say, it's obviously going to be different depending on level. But there will be a metric that you will be able to monitor and measure. That's like important for your kind of your job role and the kind of the goals you're working towards, kind of wherever that is on that chain. So that's kind of that's a really good point as well. So, but like from personal experience, I think obviously I'm very biased, but I think having like a good understanding of SEO is just like almost like a no-brainer now for like digital marketing roles, because it makes up such a big part of that, like of the like channels matrix. So like I personally love it when I chat to clients that are like knowledgeable and obviously have their own ideas, but then are like willing to kind of like, okay, I see how the strategy is going to look now, and it kind of it makes those conversations a little bit easier, I think.
Yeah, a lot more enjoyable as well, right?
Yeah,
So,
don't have to go through the repetition and sales pitch, etc.
for anyone interested in getting into SEO, what would you recommend they do to become an SEO professional?
Yeah, I think there's so many resources now, aren't there? There's so
Yeah.
many good resources. I think obviously like I think the blogs are a great place to start. To obviously start with like the latest news, but I think they can also be kind of like, I remember like a week into my SEO career reading about SEO is dead and thinking, oh geez, I might need a different career here. So
Yeah.
I think but I think others such as like, I've mentioned Ahrefs a lot. I think you can tell I'm a bit of a fan, but I think
I
their
love
blog
them.
does like a really good, like a really good job of like breaking down some quite like dense topics, but in a way that can be kind of consumed quite easily, whatever your level. So I think like identifying blogs like that, Ahrefs being one of them, and then also there's like kind of like communities. There are kind of like paid for communities like Traffic Think Tank, etc., which obviously is some monthly outgoings, but the wealth of knowledge that like an academy and a community like that is really, really valuable. Having said that, there's obviously like free alternatives on Facebook. I think just being somewhere where you can kind of like ask questions and see what's working and what isn't is really valuable. Like obviously like when I said I used to like kind of look at forums and see people posting case studies, etc., and that really got me fired up to think, I want to do that. I want to give it a go and like try and invest some money. And I think it's important to see it as an investment. Obviously, don't go and spend thousands and thousands, but if you have like some money to set aside to kind of like that you, I don't know, going to maybe spend on something else. If you were to kind of like invest that in a site of your own, I think that's kind of, it can be the most basic WordPress site out there, but at least you're getting used to kind of WordPress, which kind of what are like a huge percentage of websites actually use now, and you're likely to come into contact with later in your career anyway. There's so many times now where like I'll be able to jump in and make like a quick change just because of like the old affiliate websites I used to run. Like I remember how to like to do it and add certain, like whether it's like adding certain plugins, etc. So I think just trying to like leverage like a great resources, which there are many of. Try and get yourself in a community where you can ask questions as well, because I think that's really valuable. I think there comes with something with just reading a lot, then actually asking questions and trying to tap into people that way, and then like actually testing for yourself, like seeing what works and what doesn't. So I think and obviously those all take time. Those all take time. They take money investment, but I think they're definitely worth it if you're serious about like building that personal brand and like really plotting your career into the future as well.
Agreed. Charlie, where can people find you online?
So mainly on LinkedIn. So I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I'm on the other social, but I try to spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. Just obviously just search my name, Charlie Morley. So that's where I do a lot of interaction. Trying to like kind of post quite regularly there. I'm still kind of, having said all the testing, I'm still kind of in the process of like building out like a consultancy website. It's in there at the moment, but it's kind of, it needs a little bit of love and care. So that's something that's going to come with like some new year planning. But with LinkedIn, I'm trying to to really kind of like establish like a presence there, and yeah, and trying to kind of just get a great network of SEOs as well to kind of work with and chat to.
Okay, awesome. I'll be sure to add that link in the description. Thank you
I
so much,
appreciate that.
Charlie. Thanks for your time. Have a good day, and we'll
No,
chat
thank
soon.
you. Yeah, thank you very much.